Hello and welcome to the Xenogenesis podcast. In this episode, episode 55, we're covering chapters 3 and 4 from part 1, Metamorphosis, of book 3, Imago, of the Xenogenesis trilogy by Octavia E. Butler. My name is Richard Acton, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host,
Michael Glinkham. Hi, everyone.
Morning, Michael.
This is, to be honest, I think this is probably, not this one, but the next chapter, chapter 4, is probably the most exciting biologically chapter that we had in quite a while, I would say.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one.
Honestly, it took me by surprise that how much information we get about the biology of Oankali and specifically Ooloi. It's super exciting.
Yeah, this is one of those things that I really enjoyed about this series was that we sort of kept coming back to little bits of additional biology, and it was all really quite good. Right? It was all really quite interesting, well sort of thought out as a sci-fi premise biologically. Which, like I said way back at the very beginning of this podcast, was like the reason I like this. One of the main reasons I like this series so much was like I think it was like one of the best instances of relatively hard sci-fi that's biology.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
There's almost nothing else that's I've encountered that has biology sort of in its core so much, and here we get a nice slice of that with reference to some fun biology.
Yeah, absolutely, and honestly, it's nice that. You sort of get, we've talked about this before, but Octavia Butler uses the sort of, the Oankali are too alien, but once there's a mix of the humans, it allows, thanks to the human sort of mindset, you would say, it allows us to go into more of the understanding of the biology, because we, it's sort of like as if she wanted to sort of portray that with the added humanity to the Oankali, it allowed us to sort of understand. Otherwise, it would be too alien for us to understand the concepts behind the biology, which I find fascinating. But there are questions, as we'll get to that chapter, that I don't know how would biology actually solve itself in some of these cases.
Okay, yeah, that should be interesting to get to. So, should we get started? Should we jump into your predictions for chapter 3?
Absolutely. So I was like, wow, it's an actually Ooloi construct, right? So it's confirmed, and I felt that things are gonna get rocked hard. Like the Oankali's world is going to have to undergo some serious rethinking of things, and basically in this chapter, chapter 3, we will be like told that the rest of the family, at least the parents, will gonna get told that he's an Ooloi in fact, and the fear for his life is going to be real, right? Because we know that once the Oankali learn about that there was an Ooloi construct Ooloi created, the rest of the Oankali will probably go ballistic and try to figure out what to do next, and it probably is going to create some distortion in the community. What to do, whether to call it before it can go anywhere, or if it can do anything, or see what is going to happen. That type of thing.
Okay. Well, but we do kind of get the family's reaction, right? They're very concerned about this whole situation and angry and so on. But we haven't got into the wider societal reaction from the Oankali yet.
Not yet. Still, not yet.
The sort of political ramifications, if you will, for the existence of a construct Ooloi.
Yeah. I think this political thing appears more in chapter 4, right? But we'll get to that.
Yeah, a little bit more of that. I think it's still more like foreshadowing.
Yeah. So let's get to chapter 3 summary, I guess. So the chapter begins with Nikanj calling his family over before Jodahs falls asleep for his metamorphosis. The first one to arrive was Lilith, and the moment she arrived, she knew something was wrong. And the moment she touched Jodahs, she could tell. Our Jodahs boy was becoming an Ooloi. Tino reacted honestly like a be honest, like any human would. Angry at Nikanj because it was supposed to be impossible and also meant an exile for Jodahs. Nikanj argued back, saying that the child was perfect and the only carelessness was allowing it to become an Ooloi, nothing else. It then called them to join in it so that they can explain to them using the Oankali way. Dichan and Arches didn't hesitate, but Lilith and Tino were not so keen on that. Eventually Lilith got closer, but before she touched Nikanj, she turned around and called Tino. And here's a bit of piece of a book, paragraph from a book. He did not move. Your law, he repeated to Nikanj, but it was Lilith who answered, not law, consensus. They agreed to send accident Ooloi to the ship. Nika believes it can change the agreement. Now? In the middle of everything? Yes. What if it can't? And if they can't, Lilith said that they will have to leave law and for a while and live in the forest. Tino got close to her, looking as if he wanted to hug her, like humans usually do. But those connected with Oankali as a family felt repelled against this behavior.
Yeah, I was just. It's interesting that, as usual, Lilith has a fairly kind of level-headed reaction to this, right? She's like, it's not a hard rule, right? It's the we may be able to change the consensus's mind about this, but she also has her backup plan, right? We can go live in the woods.
Basically, like, if any problem, live in the woods. But I feel like even if they did hide in the woods, it would be a matter of time when the Oankali would circle them, like if they wanted to find them. You know what I mean?
I suppose it depends how invested they are in tracking them down.
Yeah. Yeah. Tino then turned to Nikanj and asked to talk to him in a normal way instead. So Nikanj complied and started explaining that he made a mistake and it was not deliberate. It just got too relaxed when making children because things have always gone well. Tino tried to touch Jodahs, but he couldn't. In Oankali, only same-sex parents didn't feel the repulsion from touch. So instead, Tino abruptly grabbed Nikanj's sensory arm. It was a tough organ and wouldn't be engineered with bare humans, but Tino tried. He was angry and wanted to hurt. And Oankali would have opened the wall and gone away for a while. Even Lilith would have done that. Tino tried to give pain. Pain for pain.
Yeah, it definitely seems pretty angry about this. Yeah.
The conversation was taking a long time, so that Dichan and I just created platforms to sit and wait for them to finish. Lilith went to speak to Jodahs, to ask if the child if he's fine. Even though Jodah's presence was bothering her, Lilith prevailed and stayed by his side. Jodah wasn't afraid because it knew that they would keep him safe.
Yeah, I said until Lilith came over and sat next to him, this whole conversation has been a lot of like talking about Jodahs in Jodah's presence without actually talking to it now, I suppose, which it seemed a bit rude and almost a bit unlike the way Lilith and some of the other Oankali typically get involved in this kind of thing, right? They're normally trying to include the people about whom the conversation is taking place.
I mean, it is a very human way to do it. Like, just ignore the child and argue with the adults.
I think it's a good mechanism to emphasize the kind of the urgency and importance of the like how concerned they are. The fact that they're just kind of talking about it without talking to it about this issue underscores the like how agitated they are about it.
Yeah. The conversation turned towards the fact Nikanj was so lonely, and all the Ooloi on Earth must be feeling the desperation Nikanj felt. The old agreement must change before any more accidents happen, before a flawed Ooloi is created. That was dangerous. Being a natural genetic engineer with flaw could distort or destroy with a touch. Nothing would save it from confinement in the ship and being experimented on by the Oankali.
Yeah, that's another interesting little thing we get dropped in, right? Or kind of reminded of that. An option for the Oankali is just to sort of put you on ice in that suspended animation thing, and have you unconscious more or less indefinitely, and apparently experiment on you while you're out.
I feel like that was basically what happened to all the humans who were originally taken on this ship, right?
Yeah.
So,
although it's this is kind of a bit more like doing it to one of their own to some degree, right? Still it's a construct, a hybrid of the human Oankali genetics, but still substantially Oankali.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. So this is where the chapter ends, with Nikanj reconciling with Tino and then reassuring Jodahs that it will stay with it and it will talk to all those that will come and explain everything to them. It will protect Jodahs from any harm until the metamorphosis is done. That's basically where the chapter ends. And yeah, a bit of sort of foreshadowing of shit's gonna go down in a second when the Oankali find out, and they will find out very quickly. And yeah,
it doesn't seem like there's all that much optimism that Nikanj is going to be able to persuade the rest of the Oankali that Jodahs is not a flawed Ooloi.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be. I guess maybe let's go to chapter 4 prediction, because I was about to say something and it literally matches what I think the prediction is.
Sure.
So yeah, I agree. Like, I just thought that basically, the metamorphosis is gonna be taking place, and basically Nikanj will have to keep an eye on any visitors, but basically it will be just Oankali and angry Ooloi bashing the door down, like humans bashing the door down in the Phoenix when Akin was undergoing metamorphosis, but like maybe this time a bit more polite, talking to Nikanj, but before they can say anything, they will probably wait until the end of the metamorphosis type of thing. To see if it's up to the ship, or if it's all, or are we cool?
Interesting. Yeah, it doesn't really seem the Oankali style to do anything that's sort of like, I don't know, super angry, right? They're always very very calm, very calculated, very on the level.
Yeah.
So like their version of breaking down the door is probably a little bit subtler, but still the same kind of general effect.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess let's get to the chapter 4 summary.
Mm-hmm.
So the metamorphosis was taking place, but it was taking months, with broken by few hours of consciousness here and between, and Ooloi would have to undergo it twice. That's reminding of Nikanj when Lilith was still young.
Yeah, I think Nikanj's metamorphosis, the second one, was a fair bit shorter than this.
Yeah.
I suppose that might fit a little bit with the sort of. I didn't know of any animals that sort of specifically undergo like 2 metamorphoses. I mean, they probably exist. There's usually some exception to that rule somewhere in biology, but I suppose it's a bit more like having a metamorphosis into like a nymph stage, and then the nymph kind of matures into an adult form. It's sort of a drawn out rather than a acute metamorphosis. But yeah,
I would say probably a frog would be probably one of the closest we know, because we separate its development so many stages that technically you could fit it technically, but as you said, it's very
it's kind of more continuous, and there's not really like 3 separate phases, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know of any direct parallels that have like 3 completely distinct phases punctuated by full metamorphoses. I think there are some insects that have something like they're some kind of a grub, then they kind of pupate into something like a nymph, and then the nymph matures into an adult form of some kind. I think maybe there's something like that. But yeah, that was the closest thing that I could come up with some quick searching. But it's biology. There's probably some weird thing somewhere that does it this way.
Possibly, maybe. Yeah. So Jodahs was aware few of the times that his body is physically changing. Like Akin, it developed a hair around its throat so that it could breathe underwater. It also grew more head and body tentacles. It wouldn't develop any sensory arms until second metamorphosis, but the sensitivity to the environment was already enhanced nonetheless. And something else was growing, something between his hearts. Because Jodahs was human-born, his internal organ arrangement was human. When Ooloi create the construct children, they are careful not to provoke uncontrollable immune reactions in their birth mothers. And here I just stopping the going through the book. I thought to myself, okay, 2 hearts, okay, fair enough, but that information about not to provoke the uncontrollable immune reaction. I don't remember if we talked about it, but I mean, in humans,
I think in general terms, it's kind of.
I think we covered about the whole, birth and stuff like that, and maybe we mentioned this, but like the not provoking immune reaction, like in the humans, there is the Rhesus disease because we do have antigens, present on the surface of the red blood cells. The Rhesus positive or versus Rhesus negative, and if it's positive, if if a woman was exposed to Rhesus positive red blood cells and she's Rhesus negative, she can develop antibodies, and therefore if she did, then the child, if they're Rhesus positive in the womb, there might be an antibody response to the baby's blood. So I was just curious of how do they deal with that? Obviously, making everyone Rhesus negative type of thing, but what about Oankali? We separate red blood. We separate the blood groups into like AB, and 0 type of thing. It depends on the sugars on the surface of the red blood cells. But what about Oankali? I mean, it definitely has to be a completely different blood system, right? So
presumably, yeah. I mean, I suppose we've had accounts of them, changing the immune system of humans to make them stronger, to resist additional pathogens and so on. So I would imagine that they kind of they can get around this by tweaking the mother's immune system as well as the sorts of antigens the kids might present to get around that problem. But it does present an interesting little challenge, right? And I suppose that you might not necessarily just want to make everyone like O negative. I don't actually know what the I don't know if there's any evolutionary value in particular to why we still have the. 'Cause I think the O, the absence of AB antibodies and Rhesus factor are the kind of evolutionarily older state, and then we gained AB and Rhesus as if I'm remembering correctly, something as there are some similar antigens that are presented by certain, I think one of them is flu, one of them is maybe gram-negative bacteria, and I forget what Rhesus is, but having something that was kind of similar to them but not actually them made for better or more specific antibodies. I think there was some some adaptivity for the adding those additional factors, but yeah, I'm not sure if there's also some advantage to not having them.
The only thing I remember from the evolutionary advantages of having different blood types was, I remember that type B blood, which is I think more prevalent in Africa, is advantages because the blood it comes to like advantage the resistance to diseases, and I think blood type blood B is more resistant to malaria, if I remember correctly. I would have to fact check myself on this, but I think there was something like that. Like I remember specifically, for example, sickle cell anemia happened because it's more difficult for malaria to spread, and I think type blood B was also involved in this. I don't remember if I ever read any evolutionary advantage of the Rhesus system, so why there's antigens present on the red blood cells, I'm not sure, but you'd have to look in it, and I will look after the recording obviously and look for some interesting references to explain that stuff later on.
Yeah, I don't know about the malaria thing, but yeah, I think some of the thinking is generally that you can improve self-recognition by having something that is similar to, but not the same as some pathogen that's in the environment. So you can kind of get a more specific recognition of it. I think something along those lines was the thinking. But yeah, it's an interesting yeah, I don't know enough about.
No, honestly, I can't really remember
Yeah.
myself. So we'll check and then put some in the comments. But yeah, the constructs we're told, that they have two hearts, which seems a bit radical for humans, and it seems radical for humans in general in the world of the Octavius Butler's book, because sometimes a resistor would shoot them in the heart and then run away in panic because there would be not much reaction because the other heart would be doing its job. But the organ talked here is not the second heart. It's but yeah, two double circulation, and we've mentioned about the whole, I remember when Anna and Schacht were introduced and the whole idea of breathing underwater, and then we were thinking about if the blood system as well, oxygen and stuff maybe there is something more into it, the two hearts type of thing here.
Maybe, yeah. It's two hearts just seems like a little bit of overkill, right? I didn't think that wouldn't fly evolutionarily, right?
I mean, that's ultramarine type of thing. It's you just need that extra lung and then muscle development of extra muscle that makes you weigh 300 kilogram of pure muscle weight, and then you can just put some armor and go slay some xenomorphs.
Yeah. I mean, from an engineering perspective, if you want to make someone who is just much more robust to heart failure, then okay, yeah, right, makes sense, right? Redundancy, always good, but evolution is not always a fan of that kind of redundancy unless it's
necessary.
Unless there's a specific selective pressure that's just people are constantly getting stabbed through the heart.
Yeah,
and then you can come up with a way around that's going to help. I don't even know if that's. It's a difficult thing to even begin selecting for, because how do you get to halfway to a second heart? I don't know.
Yeah,
Actually, I suppose if you had, I don't know, stronger arterial pumping, and then that was enough to keep you going after some kind of minor heart injury for longer, then maybe it would be a tricky one.
Yeah,
but you could contrive circumstances where that could get selected for.
I mean, technically, we also have two kidneys and stuff. You could technically have one big kidney that would cover stuff like that. So, we could technically have two tiny hearts that do the same job of a single heart type of thing. But
and I mean, we kind of do, right? Because we have the double circulatory loop.
Yes,
they're just sort of it's two independent pumps that do independent loops that just are stitched together in the middle, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you wanted to do double circulation but just have the pumps in different spots, that would make sense, right? There's some kind of bilateral symmetry thing where you just you end up producing two of them, but they're just located not in the middle, so they're not stuck together up the middle, and that would kind of give you a similar effect,
but then would have to have a bit difference in the chest cavity, where they're located and stuff like that. But basically you're right, we could split the heart into two ones that just do separate jobs for the two circulatory systems we have.
That would make sense as two hearts, right? It's two kind of fish-like hearts with two chambers that are just independent on doing the same loop or doing different loops, but rather than So that version of two hearts makes sense. The two four-chambered hearts is just maybe that's overkill.
yes, absolutely. Switch one off to when the other one is doing its job, so it can relax. But in here we're told about an extra organ between the hearts. It's a bit different, and it's an organ that we're told that all constructs have, at least some version of it. Males and females would store valuable cells of unfamiliar living things for the Ooloi partners. In Ooloi, the organ was much larger and more complex. Within it, the Ooloi manipulated molecules of DNA. The construction of any construct child starts there, where the Oankali and the human parent's DNA are mixed. The mixing and the organelle are the only contribution from an Ooloi. And here's a description of the book, because I thought it was very important to keep the details. The organelle had divided within each of my cells as the cells divided. It had become an essential part of my body. We were what we were because of that organelle. It made us collectors and traders of life, always learning, always changing in every way but one, that one organelle. Ooloi said that we were that organelle, that the original Oankali had evolved through the organelle's invasion, acquisition, duplication, and symbiosis.
Yeah, so this is where we get some interesting biology, right? So we have an organelle that's probably an endosymbiont or possibly endoparasite, depending on your perspective.
Yeah,
a bit like our mitochondria or the chloroplasts in plants.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the inheritance also is the same kind of pattern, right? It's or similar anyway, right? We have maternal inheritance of mitochondria in humans because the sperm is small and the mitochondria in it aren't in the head.
Yes.
That actually contains the genetic information, right? It's just basically a nucleus, and the mitochondria in the tail get stuck outside the egg, so there's no mitochondria transferred to the kid. From the paternal side, so it's a single line of maternal inheritance on your mitochondria. But same thing apparently is the case for the Ooloi, right? It's only the Ooloi, although in this case it's apparently their only contribution is genetically is the organelle. So it's like the three-parent child that we discussed back in the
that was.
Was it the Gattaca episode? I think it was the Gattaca episode.
I don't know. I do remember that we've talked about it. The fact that the whole idea of the actually we might have talked about when we were talked about the whole organelle was mentioned the first time, the Ooloi organelle, and so it makes sense that the fact that it's literally additional organelle, and the only function that Ooloi has is to spread it and allow for any sort of fertilization to take place, right?
Seems to be that they kind of contribute the organelle and then orchestrate the combination of genetic factors that come from each parent. I suppose is the
so. We are told in this chapter that sometimes Oankali, if they found... This is one that's interesting in the book, that if they found no intelligent, carbon-based life to trade with, they would leave large numbers of the organelle there on purpose, so that, abandoned, the organelle would look for home in the most unlikely indigenous life forms and trigger changes, evolution to take place, basically. Then in hundreds of thousands or millions of years, they would perhaps meet other traveling Oankali and trade with them. The organelle allowed for creation of compatibility with life forms so dissimilar that they originally were unable to perceive one another as alive. So here's the interesting parts. We learned two things. One is that we confirmed that Oankali are carbon-based, obviously, but still, it was. I remember the very first sort of like episodes of this podcast, we talked about what if they were not carbon-based type of thing, right? And the other thing is that the fact that the organelle technically can still, like as you mentioned, like be an endosymbiote to other beings that could potentially are not carbon-based.
That's a much more challenging proposition, right? Although even so. It's an interesting question, right? So these organelles, I think, these organelles that act as endosymbionts in us and in plants, right? The mitochondria and the chloroplasts, they're not capable of like free living or even readily living in another a different host, right? What typically tends to happen with these organelles is a lot of the genes that were originally encoded in their independent genomes when they were free living archaea for the most part, their genes end up in the free living bacteria, not archaea. They end up in the host organism's genome, right? So we have a lot of genes encoded in our genome inside the nucleus that are used by and kind of required by the endosymbionts that we have, so that you can't take them out of the context of the host cell and have them be fine, right? So it seems as though the Oankali organelle is much more it retains a lot more of its own genetic information inside the cell and is less dependent on the host organism.
Yeah. Huh. And also the idea of like the compatibility between a carbon-based versus non-carbon-based.
I mean, I suppose it's not necessarily explicitly non-carbon-based, but just like unable to perceive one another as life, I suppose.
I guess so.
It might still be carbon-based, but just very different.
True. I guess we'd have to.
It's unclear.
Yeah.
That would be an impressive feat.
No, absolutely. I mean, it does say here in hundreds of thousands or millions of years. So who knows? What at the time, what the Oankali, to what level the ones that are existing at the time would evolve to in that long period of time, and then whenever they would meet their co-species in a way. And then, with the mixing would taking place, and then realizing that actually, this is the branching that took place, just an organelle was left for, here. And then I wonder if that organelle also stores the knowledge of the Oankali, the previous, the generations of the Oankali type of thing. So I don't know. It'd be very interesting to.
You'd have to put a lot of genetic material inside this organelle for it to be, hosting not only its own stuff, but also some of the genetic memory of the Oankali and so on, right? It would have to be, it's probably more than is reasonable for like a prokaryote-sized genome.
Yeah, absolutely. Unless, recently I've rewatched The Fifth Element movie, and there was about the divine being that they had basically had if I remember 5 DNA strands, instead of like double helix, it was like a quintuple helix type of thing.
Okay.
And basically the idea is maybe potentially if you increase the number of strands, you potentially could store extra information on that type of thing. Who knows?
Like information, theoretically, you're kind of going in the wrong direction there.
Yeah, I know. But
like I feel it's worth exploring why that's the case for the audience, as it were. Right? If you add strands to DNA, you're just adding redundant copies of the same information, effectively, right? Because I mean, chemically, structurally, it doesn't really work in the sense of ordinary DNA, but the strands are redundant with one another, right?
Well,
so
yes,
the information on one is the same as the information on another. So if you added another strand, okay, then if you were doing a different sequence, then why would it be the same strand, right? It's just longer, right? If you want to increase the information density, you don't increase the number of strands, you increase the number of bases, because then you have more possible values, right? So it's very much the same thing that is done in like modern computing technology, right? So we have NAND flash chips, which is what our like solid state storage devices are, right? So if you have an SSD, it's got a NAND flash chip in it. The old ones were single layer flash, SLC. They had charged cells in them, which could retain like either charged or not charged, right? They had 2 states, a binary representation. Modern ones are getting up to the point of QLC, quad level flash, right? They can have 4 different charge states on them. Yeah. So instead of picking between 1 and 2, you have 4 different possible values. And DNA already kind of has that, right? So instead of using binary, it has 4 bases, which increases the amount of information that you can store in a string. If you increase that further, then you could increase the information density on the DNA strand, but you run into the problem of it's harder to distinguish, right? Because you need distinct levels that you can know with a high degree of confidence are in fact one state or the other, right? So SLC in flash memory is much more endurant, right? It can take a lot more read-write cycles because it's only two states, right? You only have to disentangle when you're doing the signal engineering, is you only have to disentangle two states, right? But QLC, that's 4 different possible charge levels, right? If the charge degrades over time, you might slip into one of the other charge levels. It's harder to tell the difference between those states, right? This is the difference between analog and digital signals, right?
No,
digital signal is a 0-1, easy to distinguish the state, easy to reconstruct what the actual information is in that signal, whereas more charge levels, all the way to analog where it's just continuous, right? It's harder to distinguish those individual states, so you have easier signal degradation, right? So that's you can increase the information density by increasing the number of bases, but you increase the risk of mistaking one base for another and thus having errors in your transmission. But yeah, that's just...
But the thing is, the way I look into this is that it's not the same type of, DNA coding as we have. So I immediately thought that let's say an additional strand, but instead of having the standard ATCG coding, we would have AFT and NG type of thing. Well, actually, I can't use N because it's already using the... But you know what I mean? Like, basically, there's a third... It's not a double base connection, it's a triple base. So there's an additional information there that it's basically additional 2 bases type of thing that basically you end up with not the 2 connections, but 3 necessary for DNA to like store that information as a triple basically type of. And if you add strands,
so if you add strands and a triplet is a required state, a triplet is like a fully I'm not sure what the correct term is, but so if any one of the items on the 3 strand has 1 value, then you can infer the value of the other items on that strand, right? So it's required that they have that triple rather than they have that pair. It gives you additional redundancy. It still doesn't really give you additional information, right? Because
yes, but depends on like if we look into that, if there is if it is a complete separate, if we assume that it's the same as DNA, that then yes, this is a redundancy because you would only need 2 of those bases. But if we think about it, if there is an overlap, which would not be the best, of like let's say that F base that we can bind to either T or G, let's say in some circumstances, then that would not be evolutionary beneficial, because then it would create errors. You're right. The more I think about it, the more there's more flaws in my thinking.
Yeah. So you can still use like a third check base as an additional redundancy check, right? You can use it to validate your sequence, as it were, and you could even use it to. So even in ordinary DNA, there are some cases where the same stretch of DNA on one strand encodes information for one function, and on the other strand encodes information for a different function. But that's a very hard thing to do because you have to have a single sequence that can encode both functions, and sometimes doing one thing will preclude doing the other thing well, absolutely. Right? So it's a much harder optimization problem.
Yeah.
That optimization problem gets a little bit easier if you have 3 strands, one of which is not fully dependent. So let's say you had 2 strands where like A is always paired with T, but there's a third one where AT pairs can be with, like, it doesn't matter what they are, but F and Q bases, right? Even if there's some uncertainty there, you can still use that as a way of having like a check bit on your information, because if you have other options, say, I don't know, T and S, then if it's T and S, then you know it's still a wrong bit, so you can you can use information encoding schemas that will still help you validate your sequence.
Yeah.
And that flexibility means you have more options for potentially encoding multiple functions in the same stretch of DNA, but it's still a harder optimization problem than just having more bases in the same thing and doing different stuff with them.
Yeah, that would be basically
yeah.
only basically error check type of thing necessary for error check.
You can use it as the equivalent of a checksum bit.
Yeah. It's that wouldn't work. See, this is interesting. So just now we've debunked the fifth elements theory, like of the divine being having 5 quintuple strand DNA. Like it's
yeah, they went the wrong way with that. If they'd added extra bases, that would have been reasonable, kind of, but not so much in the extra strands.
So but here we are told the name of the organ that grows between the two hearts, Yashi. And it's interesting because I tried to look for any translations in anything. In Japanese, it means a palm tree. But I couldn't find really anything that would remotely give a hint in terms of about the at least some suggestions of what the origin of this word could be. And sometimes some Ooloi would speak of it as if another person. I'm going out to taste the river and forest. Yashi is hungry and twisting for something new. But whether it really twisted or whether it was sensory feeling like hunger or thirst, Jodahs would find out later once it went through its second metamorphosis.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, right? People talk about their stomachs and other organs as though they're a third party.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like my stomach is speaking to me. It's hungry, type of thing. So it makes sense that they would feel some sensation of like, I want to taste some DNA. Okay, sure, type of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of a fascinating like setup, right? This like urge to go do genetic engineering.
It's like an absolute ultra nerd in our universe.
Yeah, it's like synthetic biology as a biological imperative.
It's like, I'm bored. I'm gonna do some genetic engineering. Huh. Okay. Cool. But yeah.
No, I like it.
Simultaneously, other organs started to develop as some genes that were dormant so far became active. Adult Ooloi were much more different than humans realized. Beyond their insertion of the Oankali organelle, they did not provide any genetic contribution to the children. Here's an important piece from the book. They left their birth families and mated with strangers so that they would not be confronted with too much familiarity. Humans said familiarity bred contempt. Among the Ooloi, it bred mistakes. Male and female siblings could mate safely as long as their Ooloi came from totally different group. So basically, Sweet Home Alabama does not apply to them.
Yeah, it's an interesting feature of their breeding, right? That they need they need something different, unfamiliar, to avoid making mistakes. Maybe it's the same thing with that we saw with Nikanj here to some degree, right? It's got a little bit too comfortable, a little bit too familiar. It's not paying attention enough to the.
But to be honest, the whole thing with like the humans said familiarity bred contempt, but in reality, it only brings contempt if you're poor. Like when you actually think about it, all those royal families, inbreeding between each other with brother, sister, it doesn't matter if it's the Emperor of Germany or like, Queen of England. All of them are basically siblings at some very close level, much closer than we expect. So, questionable, I would say.
Well, yeah, it didn't work out too well for the Habsburgs in the end, really.
It didn't, no. It really didn't.
No.
But yeah. So for an Ooloi, a same-sex child is the closest that they would have for a child, and that's why Nikanj was so protective for Jodahs. As Jodahs was undergoing metamorphosis, it could remember all the questions towards Nikanj, from all the other Oankali, whether they could trust it. The fact that Jodahs was an Ooloi reached far and wide very quickly. So to calm them down, Nikanj invited all those interested in law to speak to it and examine its finding with them. He wouldn't allow them to touch Jodahs though. Nikanj would not allow them to disturb Jodahs' metamorphosis. It knew what Jodahs' body needed and touch was not it. But it knew that Jodahs needed someone's presence, so it stayed with the child at all times. Jodahs mentions in his thoughts that the loneliness can be disturbing, and although it doesn't mention the name, we can tell who it is referencing to, who underwent metamorphosis away from their parents, surrounded by humans. But it was disturbing for our king that no one, even his own family, did not recognize him when he came home.
Yeah, Keen had a pretty rough metamorphosis.
Yeah, it honestly was like going from a human looking like child to a completely Oankali looking like, being. And, you arrive home and it's like no one recognizes, it's just like, shit. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, Gabe in the whole thing and like then emerging from it with the house burning down.
Yeah. I'm sure the reunion must have been fun. But yeah, Nikanj told Jodahs that it doesn't want to push it towards the human or the Oankali extreme. It wants it to naturally develop as it should. But it didn't convince people, and many thought that Jodahs should be sent to the ship. Jay was scared that even as a sub-adult, it could alter genetic code, meaning that it could hurt someone. Nikanj reassured it that it wouldn't let Jodahs to do any harm, as there is no flaw in it, and it should be aware of everything it does. Additionally, Nikanj warned Jodahs about something else, that it will be complete. Males and females have dormant abilities, but Ooloi doesn't. Instead, it will be able to change itself. Things that would take usually generations, Jodahs will be able to do immediately, take new forms, even new shells for camouflage, and etc.
Yeah, it seems like the sort of I get the impression that this is not just that this is more for Jodahs than it is for the typical Ooloi, even, right? Because the additional abilities that the humans have given the Oankali are also not dormant in Jodahs, right? It has all of the kind of additional malleability that apparently the humans brought to the picture. So yeah, it's going to be a lot more capable of self-editing, I suppose.
Basically,
than
absolutely.
The Ooloi have been up to this point.
Yeah. I guess if Jodahs wants to hide and with enough skill, not only it could change the way it looks, but I guess also it's like smell and stuff like that. The things that an Oankali can pick up very easily on, type of thing.
Actually, yeah. It may well be a lot more capable of making convincing biological disguises.
As long as it's not touched by an Oankali, I guess. Because then all cards are everything is...
I suppose as long as it's not closely inspected by another Ooloi who can go sort of, rummaging through its, what's the name of that organ?
Yashi.
The Yashi, yeah. And figure out that it's done some self-editing. But...
Yeah. Jodahs asked then if it's possible to change back to male, but Nikanj asked if it actually wants to be a male. And Jodahs wasn't sure. It was always thought that it'll be a male, so now it feels weird not to think of himself like that. But the reason why it wants to be a male is so that people wouldn't be so hard on Nikanj. They haven't accepted Jodahs yet, and thus all the anger is directed at our boy Nikanj. I have too many feelings, I said. I want to be your same-sex child, but I don't want to cause the family trouble. What do you want for yourself? No, I could not speak. I would hurt it no matter what I said. Eka, I must know what you want, what you feel, and for your own sake, you must tell me. It will be better if the people only see through me until the metamorphosis is complete. But Jodahs didn't want to be anything else but an Ooloi. But it wished that it didn't because it was causing its family some problems. But it was healthy for him to want to be what it wanted, and that was fine. Jodahs asked Nikanj if it could change itself, and yes, that's possible, but only when it matures. Then it can make itself look more male. but it wouldn't be satisfied with male sexual role, and wouldn't also be able to make contribution like men can.
The genetic contribution,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So it has to, and that's an interesting one, because it does seem as though if it has that degree of freedom to self-edit, that it could
Technically give itself,
theoretically give itself the capability to reproduce as a female. But yeah, I suppose there are some limits still on that capacity.
The Yashi organ probably prevents certain things. There's like things that like mutually exclusive, cause it be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I'm not sure what would actually be the mechanism that would underpin something like that.
Don't know. Honestly, you would
I'm
have to
thinking
have
maybe
an
something
extra
like
sort
sex
of chromosomes.
chromosomes. Yeah, maybe it's maybe there's an, although the sex is not determined chromosomally in the Oankali, so it doesn't quite stack up.
Yeah, that's also
the
true.
Absence of a
well,
I'm not sure what. Yeah, I can't think of a particularly plausible mechanism whereby that would be fixed.
Yeah.
If sex was chromosomally determined, then it would make sense, kind of.
But then the Ooloi
wouldn't have a copy of.
Yeah, but then there would be no need for Ooloi type of thing.
I mean, if the Ooloi say don't have the sex chromosomes, and you need a Y chromosome from the male, then if you don't have a Y available, then you need you couldn't become male, right? You could potentially become female if you still have a copy of X, but you couldn't become male, at least with the human analogy.
Yes.
But that's that doesn't quite map here, because we know that sex is not chromotomally determined.
Yeah, and also we know that, for example, Nikanj was pushing Jodahs towards being a male, so the environment was affecting. So technically, in a construct would probably have all three, like X, Y chromosomes available to them, and basically depending on their environment, one of them gets switched off in their whole body, right? And then once they go metamorphosis, they develop the sexual organs, I guess. Although we know that Akin was, a gigolo before his metamorphosis, as women were swarming towards him. So we know that he had a sex organ. So it's
that doesn't necessarily mean that it's like the what's the androgen insensitivity thing, but in reverse, right? You have a male genetics, but female form, because the hormones secreted don't have receptors, so you develop the female route instead of the male route, despite the genetic difference. So it's it depends a lot on what the specifics of the biology of how sex determination works are, which we know. we know we don't know exactly how that works.
Yeah, that's the thing.
We're kind
like,
of reasoning in the dark here.
Yeah, this is shooting in the dark. Like we can't really tell what's the underlying mechanism without actually being told a bit extra information on this.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a hand wave on this, but okay.
Acceptable. I guess there's enough reason to think that there is something happening, that technically maybe something's possible, I guess. But yeah, Jodahs wanted to touch Nikanj, so Nikanj got closer. It then started studying the cells in the body, wondering what would happen if it activated some of the genes. And Nikanj, though, called it out and told it, look at the cell again and observe it as it was observing originally. What happened was the cell it was looking at had genes that were normally dormant activated and secreting inappropriate hormones and causing inappropriate growth. Nikanj tells us that it's nothing that nothing would grow in it, and the cell will die because the Ooloi's body was rejecting this self-destructive behavior. Jodahs says, though, that it didn't feel wrong or dangerous, just out of place, but Nikanj tells it that if it happened in humans, they would die. I couldn't think of anything to say. My curiosity burned away in fear. When you touch them, never withdraw without checking to see whether you've done harm. I won't touch them at all. You won't be able to resist them. And this is... We are coming to this paragraph that is going to be very important. I actually copied quite a big paragraph from the book, but I think this is probably the most important information they will be given.
And it's worth pointing out that we've moved here from genetic manipulation to epigenetic manipulation, right? So now we have Jodahs playing around with
Reactivating
going
genes.
around and flipping switches on the control panel, right? So just randomly doing a little flip this here, turn that on there, and it's that's a problem if you have a misconfigured cell, as it were.
Yeah. So Jodahs scared asked Nikanj what should it do, and the only thing was to be careful. When it finds its mates, it won't be so interested in others, but as it is, it needs to be careful of the deep touch. Jodahs agreed and allowed Nikanj to study its body, and when Jay started to relax, Nikanj shouted it. It can't get relaxed, even a little when it contact with another person, not even Nikanj. And here's an excerpt of the book that mentions very important. You're too competent, too well able to make tiny, potentially deadly changes in genes, cells, or in organs. What males, females, and even some Ooloi must struggle to perceive. You can't fail to perceive on one level or another. What they must be taught to do, what they must train to do, you can do almost without a thought. You have all the sensitivity I could give you, and that's a great deal. And you have the latent abilities of your human ancestors. In you, those abilities are no longer latent. That's why you were able to activate genes in me that even I can't reawaken. That's why the humans are such treasure. They're giving us the regenerative abilities we have never able to trade before. Even though we found other species that had such abilities. I'm here because a human was able to share such ability with me. And what Nikanj meant was Liv and her cancer. So we are told, as you mentioned earlier, Richard, that the constructs are capable of more than just an Ooloi, Oankali Ooloi. And it's pretty big. And obviously, this also mentions the cancer and the whole, regeneration. Obviously, with our modern understanding of biology, that's not exactly how the things work. But nonetheless.
Yeah, and we have these still kind of slightly arbitrary constraints on the abilities that they have, like Nikanj not being able to turn on certain genes, but able to do others. So there's this kind of slightly unclear as to why a constraint on one of those things would be a constraint on other things. But it's it's fine, right?
It's acceptable
when you're dealing with. It's a bit like magic systems, right? This is kind of like a magic system in this book.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
The biological abilities serve as an analogy to a magic system. And if you don't have some arbitrary constraints on how those work, then they can get a bit out of hand.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me started. But if you look at any magic systems on like all different available, like from any fiction or stuff like this, either they call the hard magic or the soft magic. Either it's like this Harry Potter is a soft magic for everyone. So basically you think and there are some rules, but in reality those rules don't always apply and there are some weird exceptions. And then there's hard magic which is like you have to really follow the rules, otherwise it will not work, and yet it still has so weird exceptions. So yeah, I mean, I think there are some like hard magic systems which basically are like more or less completely consistent and adhere to like that strictly in the story, but you then if you're not careful with that, then you can end up with the like someone comes in and munchkins the rules and breaks everything in your universe. Absolutely. It's basically if given time, anybody with enough understanding would come up with something so outrageous that you haven't thought about. The original author of the system would not have thought about it. It'd be like, yep, that's my life now. Completely ruined everything.
I always enjoyed the books where they manage to do that well, right? They have a hard magic system mostly, but it's like heavily exploited in universe by people in doing like clever things with the rules. Yeah. But yeah, you always take a bit of a risk as an author when you put it out there, because if someone smarter than you comes along and figures out a cheat, then you're like, oh, damn it.
Yeah, exactly. No, honestly, it's. I could rant about magic systems in general for a long time, but let's not do it. But yeah, it's the cancer is suitable enough of to be explanation for this, and let's continue, I guess.
Sure.
So we know, what Nikanj meant was Lilith and her cancer, because we know of the story of, Lilith and Nikanj being famous now, where, if you all recall in book 1, where Nikanj was cut and almost lost a limb, and it was Lilith's body that helped to regenerate that tissue. And that's why Jodahs needed to be careful. It could give cancer, damage their immune system, cause neurological disorders, glandular problems, or give them diseases the humans don't even have names for in a moment of inattention. And they will have no defense against it. Even though Jodahs didn't have any reproductive organs anymore, it was still attractive for them, and eventually when it matures, it will be able to give pleasure in the contact. Jodahs' mind went back to the couple of humans it met trying to go to Mars. It wondered how it would be to be able to seduce them. But Nikanj, reading his mind, tells it to stick with constructs for now. Sorry, it's just like this is like you're thinking to yourself, and you're like, your thoughts are secure to you, and no, your parents literally reading your mind, and and you're thinking about so having sex with you is just like awkward, to say at least.
Yeah. Oh dear. Yeah, but it's this whole we get in that kind of internal monologue exactly what Nikanj was just saying, right? He's like, no, I will never touch them because this is too risky, and yeah, this is like super scary. he can really mess you up if he's not paying attention. But
and then in the same time, he's like,
immediately like
that couple, and it's just like, oh god, Jodahs, please.
Oh dear. Yeah, that's not going to end well.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is more difficult to harm them compared to humans. That was the reasoning why Nikanj suggested constructs. And the chapter basically ends with Jodahs asking Nikanj if people let it touch them. But the answer is they don't know yet. Exile would be hard for Jodahs, but maybe an exile on the ship would be the least difficult. Of course, Nikanj would not allow anyone to take him unless Jodahs wishes so. But an Ooloi could perceive more than just words. Because humans tended to misunderstand Ooloi, because, Ooloi didn't just change their minds like humans did via words. They perceived everything. Words, gestures, internal and external bodily responses, and reacted to those accordingly, in a consensus. So if one day Nikanj saw that Jay needed mates more than family, it would send it to the ship. That's where the chapter ends. And also gives us a bit more... obviously, we humans do tend to come to an understanding via words, but body language is also important. Like, if somebody is, towering over you, and then, for example, is being very polite but towering over you, like, it's sending weird signals, and we know that we feel uncomfortable nonetheless.
Yeah, I think that also there's a section about, maybe it was something to do with Tina earlier in this same chapter, where it's like humans would send like different, they'd say one thing and
their body's different, yeah.
Feel another way, and then they'd get angry when you pointed out that what they'd said didn't match with what they were.
I think it was when whether Tina was not attracted to Nikanj type of thing, because Nikanj was sending some sort of pheromones, and like he was saying no, but his body was like, give me that some sweet Nikanj's ass, type of thing.
But we've encountered that general phenomenon a lot. I think it was brought up again here, but it seems to confuse the Ooloi that the humans have this like inconsistency between what they verbalize and what they are saying with their physiology. Which
yeah. I mean, it is probably a lot of like disturbing to like you say no, inside you think, it's no, but I would clap those cheeks, but then there's some certain rules I need to follow, but then like in the being just, it's like I can tell that you're there's a but there. It's like, yeah, but it still doesn't mean I would follow up with it. There's other things related to it, but still, yeah.
Yeah, it's like the whole like potentially greater internal consistency that the Oankali have because of this kind of greater ability to, I don't know, perceive and square those things.
Yeah,
but the societal norms that are around that.
But we do, we did agree that Oankali are more biological than just, as humans, we can say one thing, think another thing, do a third thing because of whatever, and but so I don't agree with this sentence here that we just use words, and we do respond to pheromones, like if you pass by someone, you find that, for example, they smell attractive, and that's that's just biology doing its job, and like there's more to it, and I feel like, and I understand what the book, the author is trying to convey here, that we mostly rely on words, whereas the Oankali can sense everything, like so, and they do work via consensus type of thing. So
it's more the differences is cultural, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of we handle that inconsistency by telling convenient lies,
Yeah.
right? Whereas the Oankali can't practically resolve that problem that way because of the way the kind of sensory and communication stuff works. So
Yeah.
they have to just sort of be a lot more upfront about that kind of thing, which tends to offend human sensibilities.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
A bit of a culture clash, but yeah.
So yeah, I guess that's for today. I mean, let's go to my chapter 5 prediction.
Sure.
So I wasn't sure where it will go, because obviously we see some jumps in time, and obviously, but we are going we had a bit of foreshadowing of things, like Jodahs have to be careful with what it's doing with when it's sensing things. So I was thinking that as metamorphosis is taking place, and as Jodahs is getting more conscious of itself and its abilities, we will encounter some sort of like mistakes it's making that can probably lead to some serious damage if not controlled. And so I was thinking, basically the next chapter we will have this like, it's maybe realizing that it's doing something but not entirely understanding what happened, right, type of thing. It doesn't have the knowledge of exactly controlling its powers, type of thing.
Okay. Yeah. So it's got to learn to wield its powers without doing damage to others, and we'll probably see some initial training snafus.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yep, sounds reasonable. Any ideas about how you think the consensus is going to react?
I mean, in the chapter 1, episode 1, I said that I sort of spoiled myself with the table of contents. So I sort of feel that the consensus is just for the time being, to observe, but eventually, I guess I'm not gonna say it out loud, but for the people, just read the book's table of contents and see the part 2 name, and I think that the answer is there.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Damn table of contents.
Damn you, table of contents! How dare you spoil everything? But yeah, I guess that's it.
Okay, yeah, I think that's I think that's all.
Thank you very much, everyone, for listening to us. We are Xenothesis. You can find all the places we upload our podcast on xenothesis.com. I was Michael Glinka.
And I was Richard Acton.
Thank you and goodbye.